Alright, so today's webinars will be on modifiers, otherwise known as add-ons. So to begin with, I know I usually go through the setup of this, but first want to show where modifiers are located because most of my customers not even aware of that. So we'll go to do new and new estimate, and we're going to pull up a product. Not all products will have modifiers, but most of them will. And it's really adding. I believe you can add modifiers to any product. It's just you have to add them. So currently I only have it added to a few products. So we're going to look at one. Let's look at cut vinyl banners. And basically, as we mentioned, modifiers are also known as add-ons, as you can see here. So we can click on the add-ons tab. And here is your modifiers. Basically, as I mentioned, anything custom field that you want to add here. And there's certain values, actually three values that a modifier can be given, which we'll go over here in just a minute here. But just wanted to show you where on the pricing form they appear. And as you can see, appears there for cut vinyls and for wide formats. You don't really even have to search for it. It's the first tab up on there. So same thing with the rest of your products. You will see this and labeled as add-ons, and it's referring to modifiers. So we'll cancel out of there, and we'll actually go to the modifier setup, which is under setup, then pricing setup, and all pricing setup. And then on the left here, we see modifier setup. Now, by default, you guys will see additional labors, general and installation, and each one of those has a few modifiers already created in there. One thing that we're going to look at, and one thing that's most interested is the ones under general, whether there's additional charge or extra design time or rush. As you may know, rush is probably a more popular one. Just some of your customers, would need that order the next day, and just a way to signify it's a rush job, and also adding additional charge to it. Today we'll look at an additional 15% charge against the base price, but you could set up a flat fee, doesn't have to be a percentage, a number of different ways to do it. We're just going to look at that modifier. Seems to be the most popular one and a good starting one. Just go click on edit, and before we look into that, we will actually, let me cancel out of this, and we may click on one of these. Just to go through the metal part real quick, similar to the rest of the program, is just creating categories. So if you click on a category, then you have the option to do new modifier or a subcategory underneath that, or create a new category on its own. Simple enough right there. So we got our categories running. We're not going to do anything with those today, but they're there if you need it, of course. So let's click on Rush, and we're going to go through some of the setup here. And let's click Edit here. And as you see, first you're going to be given a modifier code. That can be renamed. It just needs to be out of the edit mode, of course, and you can see you can rename that. The reason why we have this situated like that is this modifier code can be used in product layouts, which I will get to later. But if you need to change that, we do this rename function. You might see this on parts and products and other areas in the system, but when you update it in this way, it'll actually update this language within the CFL or coding that we have within the program, or anywhere else this is being used. So it's a nice little feature where you could update it here and don't have to worry about updating formulas that may be using this modifier code. And then the category, of course, right now it's just under general, but you can flip it over. So easy way to clone things and move things into other categories. Print as is what you wanted to print on your invoice. As I mentioned earlier, we could add the modifier code to your product layout. And what I mean by that is product layout is what actually appears on your invoice. So you're probably used to seeing, your description, the height and width of the product, and other details. Well, we could actually add these modifiers to that. That's really simple enough, something that does get taken care of through the consulting department, but it's just a simple code that we add to the product layout, which in turn you could see these modifiers on your invoice. And then the fourth section here is the question and label. So as we saw on when we're creating an estimate in the pricing form, it's basically what you want to be labeled. So this just has a label of next day rush question mark. So in this case, it's a checkbox. Usually with most checkbox, you probably have a question mark at the end. The sort level is basically the priority of what you want to give it on your modifier list. So if you want this to be 1 on your list, you label as 1, or if you want to be 2 or 3, you can signify that. And then here is your entry options. As I mentioned earlier, basically are limited to 3 different types of modifiers. You could do your checkbox, which is basically your yes or no values. You could do your numeric spinner, which is entering in a value. And then you have your drop-down list. Now your drop-down list is basically your selection list that we have. So as you can see, most of these are parts that we have in your system, and that is why we have this part consumption formula. So let's say you decided to pick a particular selection list, and that selection list is basically a dynamic list that's pointing to your parts. And you could add that in here, and you could add a consumption formula saying when this part is consumed, how much to consume it, and which IDs, which units to use. So it gets a little bit more complicated with that, but drop-down list is simple enough. You create your own drop-down list. Doesn't have to be any parts. It could be a list of things. You could have something as a rush job and say, hey, it needs to be through one of your carriers, through UPS, FedEx, or anything you guys have local. Alrighty, so that basically is the basic setup of the modifier. The next section is pricing. So as I mentioned earlier, before we get down to the formal part, we could do different pricing. So standard cost plus pricing would, of course, use the prices that are maybe tied to any parts. If you decide to use that selection list, and it's using plus pricing, so it's taking that and multiplying against your multiplier and taking that suggested retail price that gets passed on. Using suggested price from parts is just using basically the cost without the multiplier. So whatever the total price of all your parts are. And then the lastly and the most common function of your modifier is your formula. As I mentioned, this is basically a modifier for rush jobs, and usually with that, it's usually a percentage multiplied against the product or a flat fee. And in this case, we decided to do a percentage. So this is basically 15% multiplied against your base price. Is what we have here. So anytime this modifier is selected, it's going to be adding an extra 15% to the order. Or if you just want to do a flat fee, it's simple enough. Say you want to do something like 25, you're actually just typing that number in then at this point. You don't have to do any type of formula. It's just a base price. So anytime this is selected, additional $25 is being added. So simple enough. You don't want to get too fancy with formulas there. And the next, actually, let me just type that back in there.
So basically, I could have a rush 1 and a rush 2. Could I? So one would have a set fee, and the other one would just be a percentage.
Exactly right. And I've actually seen that multiple times. And they actually have it before we even had this. You might even remember, and some of our older versions, we didn't even have the shipping tab. So a lot of this was actually used for that purpose, because a lot of people had just flat fees for shipping, especially in the local area. So they had a number of modifiers set up for that purpose. And then also, like you had mentioned, you could have it for 2 different rushes, one based on a percentage and one a flat fee. And then your products tab right here is what products you want this modifier to appear on. So you could see right here, we pretty much have it on all of our cut vinyls, our digital prints product, some of our electric signs, some of our repo graphics and vehicle wraps right here. So every one of these products on their pricing form, since it's been included on this list, this modifier will show up on that pricing form.
It just has to be select all, does it? And then you get the whole lot. So are they in there now, or do they have to actually be selected?
Yeah, so this is something another feature that you see throughout the system that gets kind of confusing. Everything that you see in this list has been selected. Basically, this select
Right.
all and unselect all is if I were to select all and then I hit remove, then it would remove all these.
Right.
Unselect all just unchecks them, and then I could just select a particular couple, hit remove, and then that modifier is
Right.
gone from that list.
Yep.
Um, yeah, so you see this throughout the system, and everybody does have questions on how this works. So not only here, you'll see it in parts and products, this little grid system. And then basically, you could use an alternative. So let's say we set up this modifier this way, but on a particular product, we want to set it up maybe a little different. Here's your option to do that. So each one of these you can kind of select and maybe use a different selection list, different than the one that you signified on that original modifier. And we have your parts tab right here. This is another feature of kind of basically associating a part with a product. um, doesn't necessarily have to be associated with that product. It's usually the primary purpose. This is very similar to whenever you set up a product, you have the parts tab. Same exact concept. So basically any part you want to see added to this product, you can look at one most common one is maybe labor. Let's say, hey, this is going to cost a little bit more labor because it's a rush job and who knows? Maybe my let's see something good here. Packaging and shipping. That'd be probably a good one. This one gets exponentially used. So you could already have packaging and shipping on that product. Could be a possibility. More than likely not. Usually shipping is added through the shipping tab or a product of its own. Well, let's say in this case, you have this modifier already, you have it as a rush job, and you just want to be simple enough and include packing and shipping. And you can do that because since it's a part in the system. So as you can see, just added in that part, and you can be has this expression right here, include this part for rush, and you have the option of always. So basically, if you select always, this modifier is selected, then this part will be included. Uh, Same concept when linking parts onto products. And then you could give it a formula if needed to tell how much you want it to consume. And of course, if you do an inventory, how much you want it to be replenished when this product is consumed. So a little bit more advanced in these cases, but something you could have. You could also have this part included when this modifier is selected and manually override the price for this particular part. That's also another option. And then the last tab on here is just the advanced tab, just showing what tabs are available. So right now we have them all selected here. Show tags is a little bit more advanced feature within the program, but just to explain it, you could actually tag this modifier throughout other areas in the system. One example is in the very beginning of your setup, you're probably used to seeing your adjust part information screen. We can basically add a tag to where that kind of appears on your adjust part information screen as a column. So an example of how tags are used throughout the system. And this is basically your basic modifier. The only caveat, additional setup you might have to do, as mentioned, is with selection list, and that's simple enough to do if you're not familiar with that. It's in the same area under setup and pricing setup and all pricing setup. This is how we got here to the modifier. And you can actually see here we have your selection list. And same kind of concept, you could actually throw it underneath a particular category. So, hey, if you're creating this modifier to be used just with your cut finalists, probably makes sense to put that selection list underneath there. But simple enough, clicking on the category, hitting new list, giving it a name, and as mentioned, this list can be anything. It doesn't necessarily have to be any parts. Definitely a way to go. If you're trying to link it into any parts, you're not familiar how to set up selection list, it's just simply clicking this drop down next to insert row. And instead of inserting rows and simple text, you're just doing add dynamic part category. And if you click on that, basically gives you a list of all your parts, part categories in the system, I should say. So any parts underneath that category will essentially become your selection list. And from there, you can set up a consumption formula to tell the system how to consume these parts when they're being used with the modifier. And of course, you're just giving the selection list a name here. And then when you are setting up your modifier setup, simple enough, you're just using that drop down and you can simply type in the few letters or scroll through here to find that list that you just created. And then here, probably forgot to mention this, is you do have the option to leave it open-ended. So if this limit to list option is not checked, you could actually type in something there into the list. If its box is checked, of course, then that's not an option. And then this last thing right here, save extra transaction variable for record for reporting, is basically you kind of familiar with the activities on an
Mm-hmm.
order report. And basically, anytime this modifier is used, any variables that are associated with it can be used, kept a record of for reporting. That's all that means. Yep. And so as I mentioned, kind of a quick setup to modifiers. Best used for situations as just adding something additional to the job that's not necessarily on the pricing form. So
Right.
any ideas that you have that you see that like, hey, a good one that some customer had mentioned a little while ago is for our small formats, staples. That wasn't an option. Couldn't add it. Didn't necessarily want to add it as a part of some very minute thing. So created a modifier and decided, hey, anytime I use more than 10 staples, I want this to be checked. So I want to kind of incur pricing for that. So
Mm.
simple things like that, anything that you want the order or product to be increased by because you're feeling, hey, it's being used or extra time is being spent or a rush job. Really great thing to use is these modifiers for that situation. Alrighty, Michael. So that kind of concludes the webinar today. Did you have any questions?
Not really. It's one of those things I think I've got to go through and just try and see where it's going to fit in and just do a couple. It's basically just the rush one.
Correct. Yeah. As I said, pretty simple setup. It's just knowing the uses for it. That's when it comes in handy. And then pricing it doesn't have to be complicated. I said like this is basically your formula if you want to do anything against the base price. Simple enough. Or if you're just adding a flat fee, as I mentioned, then you're just typing in a number. Don't have to get too complicated.
Yeah.
Of course, it can if you wanted to. That's really what it's there for. But yeah, modifiers, like I said, pretty simple to set up, especially if you're not doing any selection lists and it's just a yes or no whether this needs to be added to the order, which is usually the case and why it's referred to as add-ons on those pricing forms.
Right. And so did you say it would also show up on the invoice as well?
Yes, there's a little caveat to that, and basically, to kind of show you any particular order we have here. This right here is what we refer to as the product layout, and this also appears on your invoice. Now,
Yep.
what we could do with the modifiers is, as I mentioned, they give it a modifier code, which is what we use in the CFL or product layout or within the product layout, I should say. So any modifiers that you set up, we just add a couple of lines of extra code, basically saying, hey, when this modifier is selected, show it in this product layout, which in turn will show up on your invoice. So
Right. Okay.
doesn't take very long to do. I think only like 10 minutes, depending on how many modifiers you want to do. Usually, in this case, what I've seen from other customers is, especially the ones that don't have any hours. And if you have time, which I think you do, then it's not a big deal to
Yeah.
you. You could just spend 5 minutes. But for some of those customers that have to purchase a whole hour, we always kind of recommend, well, just, you set up a few modifiers because that's usually the case. It's not just one. And then we'll add them all at the same time. Just be a quick 5 minute thing that we could copy and paste into each one of these layouts. So simple enough.
Right.
All right. Any other questions? It doesn't have to be about modifiers. Any general open questions you might add?
Yeah, just when I've allocated a payment to an invoice,